The atmosphere in the building was as charged as it had ever been. People hustled and bustled around, absorbed in their own daily tasks, seemingly unaware of the storm that was brewing just outside the glass doors. The hum of conversations, the occasional ring of a phone, and the quick tapping of heels on the marble floors formed the soundtrack of this corporate world. But for one man, the sound of this routine noise was nothing more than a dull buzz. Khaled Al-Mahdi, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, was fuming. Dressed in his tailored suit, cut to perfection, Al-Mahdi exuded an aura of authority that demanded attention. His every step echoed the years of power and wealth he had amassed. He was a billionaire, known for his sharp business acumen and his ability to close even the most difficult deals. People often feared him, and rightfully so. His reputation was built on precision and ruthlessness. But this morning, even the finest suit couldn't mask the fury inside him. The deal that had seemed so promising just a day ago was now slipping through his fingers. He had been on the phone with several of his top executives, all of whom were delivering bad news. There had been a glitch in the system. Negotiations had fallen apart. The partners he had worked so hard to align were backing out, one by one. The tension in the room was palpable, and it was beginning to affect him. Khaled was not a man who dealt with failure well. In fact, he had built his empire by never allowing failure to take root in his life. He knew how to fight back, how to conquer obstacles, but this situation felt different. His frustration was starting to boil over, and it was becoming clear to those around him that he was near a breaking point. He stood in the building's sleek modern lobby, his eyes scanning the room in a mix of irritation and impatience. A dozen thoughts raced through his mind, none of them positive. He was surrounded by the kind of sterile, corporate design that was meant to impress. The polished floors gleamed under the overhead lighting, and the minimalist artwork on the walls only served to highlight the emptiness of the space. This was a building filled with ambition, but at that moment, Khaled couldn't see anything but his own frustration. He was preparing to leave, to retreat into the privacy of his penthouse office and stew over the mess that his day had become. His mind was clouded with thoughts of the failed deal, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a blow that would haunt him for some time. As he made his way toward the exit, something caught his eye. It was a janitor quietly going about his work. Normally, the janitors in the building were nothing more than background figures. They moved quickly, cleaned the floors, and did their jobs without ever drawing attention. They were part of the scenery, invisible to the high-profile figures who walked past them each day. But this janitor, this man, stood out. He wasn't doing anything particularly remarkable, yet something about him caught Khaled's attention. The janitor, a middle-aged black man named Malik, was sweeping the floor near the entrance, his movements deliberate and controlled. There was no rush in his steps, no frantic energy to suggest that he was simply trying to get through his work. Instead, he seemed to be absorbed in the task at hand, his expression calm and focused. His presence in that moment was almost a stark contrast to Khaled's own turmoil. Where Khaled's mind was spinning with thoughts of failure, Malik moved with a quiet, unshakable composure. For a moment, Khaled almost dismissed him as another low-level employee, someone whose existence had little bearing on his world. But as the billionaire looked at the janitor more closely, something shifted. Perhaps it was the rhythm with which Malik worked, or perhaps it was the quiet dignity he carried himself with. But there was something different about this man. Khaled's annoyance momentarily turned to confusion. As he turned to leave, the sound of Malik's voice cut through the silence. It was unexpected, the tone of the janitor's words breaking through Khaled's clouded mind like a thunderclap. "Is everything all right, sir?" The words were simple, but they were spoken with such clarity and assurance that Khaled found himself pausing in his tracks. The janitor wasn't speaking in the broken, hesitant manner that one might expect from someone of his position. No, his words were crisp, articulate, and almost commanding. Khaled's mind, already on edge from a failed business deal, couldn't help but focus on the man in front of him. He turned slowly, a slight frown forming on his face. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a mix of annoyance and surprise. The janitor Malik repeated himself, this time slower, as if sensing the billionaire's confusion. I said, is everything all right? You seem troubled, sir. Khaled's first instinct was to dismiss the comment, to ignore the janitor and continue with his plans to leave. But something in Malik's gaze, something in his presence, caused him to hesitate. It wasn't just the words. It was the calmness, the confidence with which Malik spoke. It was as if the janitor had the ability to see through Khaled's carefully constructed facade and into the storm raging beneath it. Khaled's annoyance flared briefly, but it quickly subsided. He had been on the edge all morning, and Malik's unexpected words had caught him off guard. He had wanted to leave in a fit of anger, but now, with the janitor's steady gaze and his unexpected question, Khaled found himself standing there, frozen in the lobby of the building he had once ruled. The usual power he exuded seemed to have dissipated, and for the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering who this janitor was and why his words had such an impact on him. Khaled was no stranger to power. He had been in control of every situation for years. But here, in this moment, in the presence of this man, he felt something shift, a crack in the armor he had so carefully built. Khaled stood still, his heart beating faster than usual. The lobby, once filled with the sound of voices and the hum of bustling activity, suddenly felt distant. Everything was quieter now, the world outside his immediate space fading into a blur. All his thoughts were now directed at one singular moment. Malik, the janitor, standing there in front of him, speaking perfect Arabic. Is everything all right, sir? Malik's voice had cut through Khaled's anger with an unexpected softness. The words were simple, yet they held a weight that made Khaled freeze. For a few seconds, Khaled was unable to respond. His mind tried to comprehend the situation, but it felt as though everything had just been turned upside down. How could a janitor, a man of apparent little importance in this pristine corporate world, speak Arabic with such fluency and ease? The language, the very same language that Khaled had spoken since birth, the language of his family's legacy, felt almost foreign coming from Malik's mouth. Khaled had spent his life being taught that language was not just a tool for communication, but a form of power. He had studied Arabic and English with equal intensity, honing his skills to perfection. He'd used his command over words to build his empire, manipulate situations, and navigate complex negotiations. But now, here stood a man who had spoken his mother tongue in a way that made Khaled pause. He had to question not just what he had heard, but why it had such a strong effect on him. Malik's calm expression hadn't shifted. There was no rush or expectation in his gaze. It was as though the janitor was not just making an observation, but inviting Khaled into a conversation he had no intention of escaping. There was no fear in Malik's voice, no hesitance. It was like speaking Arabic was just as natural to him as breathing, and Khaled, for the first time in a long while, felt the weight of his own privilege, a privilege he had never questioned before. Where did you learn to speak Arabic? Khaled finally managed to ask, his voice quieter than he had intended. There was an edge of curiosity in his question, but it was also mixed with an undeniable frustration. This janitor, with his simple demeanor, had somehow put a crack in the facade of invulnerability that Khaled had spent his life constructing. Malik didn't seem at all fazed by the question. He simply smiled, as though he had been expecting it, and continued his task of cleaning the lobby. I grew up in Morocco, he began, his voice steady as he spoke. My father was a scholar, and he made sure that I understood the importance of language. Arabic, French, and a few other languages, he believed that they opened doors, especially for someone like me. There was something in Malik's words that caught Khaled's attention. It wasn't just the casual mention of languages, it was the reference to his father's philosophy. To Khaled, who had always been surrounded by the wealth and status of his father's legacy, this idea of self-taught wisdom felt strange. Malik had not been born into wealth or power. He had learned languages and wisdom not from tutors or prestigious schools, but from a father who had seen value in education beyond wealth. Khaled's mind whirled. He thought about his own upbringing in Saudi Arabia. He thought about his father, a man who had taught him the importance of name, reputation, and control. But the one thing his father had never taught him was humility, how to see the world beyond his own narrow, often arrogant perspective. It was almost laughable now, the way he had been taught to look down on people who occupied positions like Malik's. His father had always said that those who served were there to be served, not to teach. But now, in this moment, Khaled was beginning to question everything he had been taught. Your father sounds like a wise man, Khaled said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He didn't expect the sincerity in his voice, but it was there, and Malik noticed it. Malik nodded, though his expression remained neutral. He replied simply. He believed that no matter where you were in life, there was always something valuable to learn. Whether it was from the books he read or the people he met along the way, he always said that the key to life was understanding, not just knowing. There's a pause, a shift in the air, as Khaled absorbed the weight of those words. For a moment, he didn't think about the multi-billion-dollar empire he had spent decades building. He didn't think about the meetings or the deals or the luxurious offices. All of that seemed so distant, so hollow in comparison to the calm and grounded presence that Malik embodied. The man before him had something that Khaled couldn't quite define, a sense of peace and purpose that Khaled had never truly felt, despite all his material success. You've taught me something today, Khaled admitted after long silence, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes locked with Malik's, and there was a vulnerability in his gaze that he rarely allowed anyone to see. I thought I knew everything there was to know about success, but you've shown me that there's more to it than what's on the surface. Malik didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply looked at Khaled with a quiet understanding. He didn't need to say anything to acknowledge the shift that had just taken place. It was as if Malik knew that sometimes the most profound lessons came not from the people who spoke the loudest or the wealthiest, but from the people who had nothing to prove. Khaled was caught in that moment of clarity, a moment that felt almost surreal. The powerful businessman who had spent years building his empire, the man who had never questioned his own sense of superiority, was standing before someone who had, with just a few words, knocked down the walls of arrogance he had so carefully built. And for the first time in his life, Khaled was truly listening, not to his own voice, but to the voice of someone who had taught him more about life than he could ever have imagined. As the conversation between Khaled and Malik continued, Khaled felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about his business empire, his wealth, or his connections. Instead, his mind wandered to the past, to the lessons his father had taught him, to the pressures that had shaped him into the man standing before Malik. Khaled had always been the son of privilege, born into a family whose wealth and influence stretched across the Middle East. He had grown up with a sense of entitlement. His father, a powerful businessman in his own right, had always expected the best. Khaled's childhood was a whirlwind of tutors, private schools, and exclusive clubs, places where the elite rubbed shoulders with one another, each one vying for power, respect, and influence. His father's mantra had been simple. Success wasn't just about money, it was about control. Khaled had absorbed this lesson as a child, and it had become the foundation of his entire life. From an early age, Khaled had been taught to focus solely on success, on wealth, on status, on power. His father had often reminded him that money was not just a means to an end, it was a tool, a weapon. With wealth, Khaled, his father would say, you control the world. With wealth, you control the people around you. The underlying message was clear, nothing else mattered. Loyalty, friendship, love, these were secondary to the pursuit of power. This philosophy had shaped Khaled's early years. He had worked tirelessly, making the right connections, navigating the complex world of business deals with the precision of a master strategist. He had closed deals with ruthless efficiency, climbed the corporate ladder, and quickly became a billionaire in his own right. Yet, despite his wealth and success, there was always a gnawing emptiness inside him, an absence that he couldn't quite place. He had everything anyone could ever dream of: luxury cars, private jets, a penthouse that looked out over the city skyline, but there was still something missing. The drive for power had consumed him, leaving little room for anything else. His father had often reminded him that showing weakness was unacceptable, that vulnerability was a sign of failure. Men like us do not show weakness, his father would say. We are above such things. Weakness is for those who are destined to fail. And so, Khaled had built his persona as the unshakable businessman. He had perfected the art of maintaining control in every situation, never letting his emotions show, never revealing any vulnerability. But today, standing in this lobby, speaking with Malik, something inside Khaled was beginning to shift. The anger that had driven him to the building earlier seemed so distant now. His frustrations over the failed deal, his struggles to meet the expectations of those around him, all felt insignificant in comparison to the quiet wisdom Malik had shared. Khaled had never really understood that there was more to life than the pursuit of wealth. In his mind, success had always been defined by the balance sheet, the numbers, the status. But now, after hearing Malik's simple words, he was starting to question everything he had known about success. For the first time in years, Khaled thought about the life his father had led. His father had been a man of immense power, but his relationships had always been transactional. Every interaction had been calculated, every gesture had been designed to advance his standing in the world. Khaled had seen how his father had treated people, not as individuals, but as pawns in the grand game of life. There was no room for kindness or understanding. His father had taught him that empathy was a luxury, something that only the weak indulged in. But in Malik, Khaled saw something different. Malik had spent his life working as a janitor, cleaning the very spaces where Khaled held meetings, closed deals, and lived out his life of luxury. Yet, despite his position in society, Malik had wisdom and grace that Khaled's father had never possessed. Malik had learned the value of language, not as a tool to manipulate, but as a bridge to understanding, to connection. His words were not just empty phrases. They were born from a place of true experience, of living a life that hadn't been dictated by wealth or power. And it was this very wisdom that had caused Khaled to pause, to reconsider everything he had been taught. Khaled had always felt like he was walking in his father's shadow, always striving to live up to the man's impossible standards. But now, as he stood in front of Malik, Khaled felt a subtle shift in his perspective. He wasn't just the product of his father's teachings anymore. He was a man who had the power to redefine his own understanding of success. Do you ever feel trapped? Khaled asked, his voice breaking the silence between them. The question surprised even him. He hadn't meant to ask it out loud, but the words had slipped out before he could stop them. Do you ever feel like you're stuck in a life that isn't your own? Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he paused in his work, as though considering the question carefully. Then, with a calm smile, he said, "I don't think anyone is ever truly stuck, sir. Life may not always go the way we want it to, but we always have a choice. The key is to find peace in that choice, to be at peace with who you are, regardless of what the world expects of you." Khaled absorbed Malik's words, allowing them to sink in. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his life's choices. His pursuit of wealth, of status, had always been about proving something to his father, to the world, to himself. But now, in the quiet of the lobby, he realized that perhaps he had been pursuing the wrong thing all along. Malik had been right. True success wasn't about control or domination. It was about finding peace within oneself, about being content with who you were, no matter where you stood in the social hierarchy. Khaled's life had been built on the notion that he needed to be the strongest, the most powerful, the most influential. But now, standing in front of Malik, he understood that true power lay in humility, in the ability to let go of the need for validation and simply live with integrity. It was a realization that left Khaled speechless. For the first time in his life, he felt the stirrings of something new, something that had nothing to do with wealth or business deals. It was the beginning of a change, a shift in his understanding of what it meant to truly succeed. As the conversation continued between Khaled and Malik, the billionaire felt something unusual stirring within him. What had started as a moment of irritation at his failed business deal had turned into something much deeper, an unexpected connection. The words Malik had spoken, simple yet profound, had struck a chord in Khaled. He had always believed that power was everything, that wealth was the ultimate sign of success. But now, as he stood in the lobby with Malik, he was beginning to question that deeply ingrained belief. Khaled had built his empire with a single-minded determination, clawing his way to the top through deals, mergers, and strategic investments. He had surrounded himself with the most successful and influential people, cultivating a network of power that reinforced his position as a king in the business world. To him, success was measured by the value of the assets in his portfolio, the scale of the corporations under his command, and the respect he commanded from his peers. But Malik, a janitor whose job it was to clean the very floors Khaled walked on, had managed to make him feel something Khaled had long suppressed: humility. Malik's calm demeanor and the simplicity with which he spoke had opened Khaled's eyes to something far more valuable than any deal or asset he had ever acquired. It wasn't wealth or status or power, it was the ability to connect with others on a human level, to be seen, heard, and understood, regardless of one's position in life. "Tell me more about your father," Khaled said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. His voice was softer now, more reflective than before. Malik, who had resumed his work but was still fully engaged in the conversation, paused for a moment to gather his thoughts. "My father was a man of deep conviction," he began, his voice steady and clear. "He didn't care for material wealth or power. He cared about knowledge, about understanding the world in all its complexities. He taught me that no matter where you come from, you have the power to shape your own destiny. It's not about the money you make or the title you hold. It's about what you do with the life you've been given." Khaled absorbed Malik's words as they hung in the air like a breath of fresh air in the midst of a suffocating reality. He had spent his life chasing something that, in the grand scheme of things, seemed increasingly insignificant. He had never questioned the path he had taken until now. Malik, with his humble background and simple wisdom, had shown him a different way to view life. The truth was, Khaled had never really stopped to consider what truly mattered. He had been so caught up in the chase for more that he had forgotten to appreciate the small moments, the moments that made life worth living. "I've spent my whole life building this empire," Khaled said, almost to himself, as if trying to make sense of his own thoughts. "But I've never really thought about what it's for. What's the point of all this power if I'm still empty inside?" Malik set down his broom for a moment and turned to face Khaled fully. "The point is, you have the power to change. No matter how far you've gone down a path, it's never too late to turn around. The question you need to ask yourself is not whether you've succeeded, but whether you're content with what you've become. Are you happy with the life you've built, or are you just chasing an illusion of success?" The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Khaled had never thought about success in these terms. He had always seen it as a destination, a place to reach. But Malik had framed it as a journey, a personal experience, a choice. Success, Khaled realized, wasn't a checklist of achievements. It was a state of being, a peace with oneself, a balance between ambition and contentment. Malik's wisdom resonated with Khaled in a way that was difficult to put into words. It was as if the janitor had uncovered a truth Khaled had buried deep inside himself for years. All the money, all the deals, all the power, none of it could fill the emptiness that had slowly crept into his life. And for the first time in a long while, Khaled felt a sense of vulnerability, a sense of humility that he hadn't felt since his early childhood. "You're right," Khaled said, his voice tinged with a realization that was almost painful. "I've spent my life running after something that was never really mine to begin with. I thought if I could just build enough, achieve enough, I would be happy. But now, standing here with you, I see that happiness isn't something you can achieve through success. It's something you find along the way." Malik smiled, the same calm smile he had worn throughout their conversation. "It's good that you're beginning to see that. Success will come, but it's not the only thing that matters. People matter. Relationships matter. What you give to the world is far more important than what you take from it. Khaled was silent for a moment, reflecting on Malik's words. He had always believed that in order to succeed, he had to conquer everything around him, his competition, his fears, his emotions. But now he realized that true success didn't come from conquering others. It came from understanding oneself, from being at peace with who you were and the choices you made. "You've taught me something today," Khaled said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like my whole perspective has shifted." Malik nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. Sometimes, the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected places. The key is to listen, truly listen, to the people around you. You might be surprised at what you can learn. The connection between the two men had deepened, not through grand gestures or profound declarations, but through the quiet exchange of wisdom, understanding, and empathy. Khaled, the billionaire, had found a truth that he had never expected to discover in the most unlikely of places, in the words of a janitor who, with nothing but his life experience and quiet confidence, had helped him see the world differently. Khaled's gaze lingered on Malik for a moment, appreciating the simplicity and depth of the wisdom he had shared. It was a reminder that no one, no matter their station in life, was truly insignificant. Everyone had something valuable to offer. And sometimes, the people who seemed the least important held the most profound truths. As Malik continued his work, quietly sweeping the floor and keeping his focus on the task at hand, Khaled stood there in silence, processing everything that had been said. The noise and the chaos of the day, the failed deals, the pressure to maintain his empire, seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the quiet wisdom Malik had shared. Khaled's thoughts were no longer consumed by business, by the power he had fought so hard to attain. Instead, his mind was consumed by a deeper question: what was the true purpose of it all? The shift within Khaled wasn't something he could easily explain, nor was it something that could be undone. The weight of Malik's words lingered, pressing against the walls of Khaled's previously unshakable confidence. In the quiet stillness of the lobby, Khaled was confronted with a realization that had eluded him for years. His pursuit of power and wealth had come at the cost of his inner peace. He had spent so much of his life measuring success by external standards, by how much money he made, how many people feared or respected him, how much influence he wielded, that he had completely neglected to examine what truly mattered to him. Was it the constant struggle to stay on top? Or was it something more, something he had long buried beneath his ambition? The realization was painful, yet liberating. For the first time in years, Khaled found himself questioning the very foundation of his existence. He had been living according to rules that others had written for him, rules that defined success in terms of material gain and social standing. He had never paused long enough to question those rules, to ask if they were truly his own or simply a reflection of his father's legacy, a legacy that had shaped him from childhood. His father had always taught him that power was the key to everything, that money was the only means to true control, that the pursuit of wealth and influence was the highest form of success. But now, standing in this building with Malik, Khaled wondered if his father's lessons had been misguided all along. Malik, who had said so little but offered so much, had opened Khaled's eyes to a truth he had long ignored. Success wasn't about what you acquired. It was about how you lived, how you treated the people around you, and how at peace you were with your own choices. The pursuit of wealth, of power, had consumed Khaled for so long, but now he realized that this pursuit had often left him feeling emptier than before. He had acquired everything he had ever wanted, yet still, something was missing. The business world had always been a battlefield to him. He had spent his life trying to outwit, outlast, and outsmart everyone around him. Success, to him, had always been about winning the biggest contracts, the most lucrative deals, the most powerful alliances. But now, as he looked at Malik, he realized that true success wasn't about winning over others. It was about finding balance within yourself. It was about understanding that power didn't come from dominating others, but from knowing who you were and being at peace with your place in the world. Malik, Khaled said softly, his voice filled with a newfound humility, you've helped me see something I've never considered before. All these years, I've been chasing something I thought was important. But now, I realize I've neglected the most important thing of all, peace within myself. Malik, who had been listening quietly, nodded slowly, as if he had expected Khaled to reach this conclusion. It's not too late, he said, his voice calm but firm. You have the power to change, to redefine what success means to you. It's not about the title or the bank account. It's about the relationships you build, the way you treat people, and how content you are with the choices you make. Khaled looked at Malik, a sense of gratitude filling him. He had spent so much time striving for external validation, always seeking more, always needing to prove something to the world. But now, standing here, he understood that validation didn't come from others, it came from within. For the first time, Khaled realized that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even to himself. He didn't need to be the richest, the most powerful, or the most influential. He didn't need to hold on to the reins of control so tightly. True success, he now understood, was about freedom, the freedom to live authentically, to embrace one's vulnerability, and to find joy in the simple moments. Malik's words had planted the seed of change in Khaled's heart, and now it was up to him to water it, to nurture it, and to allow it to grow. It would not be an easy journey, and it would not happen overnight. But Khaled was ready to take the first step, ready to let go of the need to control everything around him and instead embrace the peace that came from within. You're right, Khaled said, his voice filled with conviction. I've spent so much time trying to control the world around me that I've never taken the time to control myself. It's time to make a change, time to focus on what really matters. Malik smiled, a small but knowing smile. He didn't need to say anything more. Khaled had understood. The change had begun, and it was up to him to see it through. Khaled knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would require him to let go of old habits, to confront uncomfortable truths about himself, and to rebuild his life in a way that aligned with his newfound understanding of success. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that there was more to life than the relentless pursuit of wealth, and that the true measure of success lay not in how much you owned, but in how you lived. As Khaled walked toward the exit of the building, the world outside felt different. The building seemed a little less imposing, the streets a little less hurried. For the first time, he could breathe. He was no longer chasing something outside himself. Instead, he was finally beginning to understand the true meaning of success, the freedom to live authentically without the need to prove anything to anyone. Khaled stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't known in years. The weight of the world, his businesses, his reputation, his relentless drive for success seemed a little lighter. His steps were no longer driven by the usual urgency to conquer, to win. There was a sense of stillness in him now, a quiet strength that had replaced the frantic energy that once fueled him. The world outside the building had always been something he had tried to control, something he had viewed as a series of obstacles to overcome. But now it felt different. The busy streets, the honking of horns, the people rushing by, it all seemed part of a much larger tapestry, one that didn't need to be conquered but appreciated. For the first time, Khaled felt a connection to the world around him rather than a need to dominate it. His mind wandered back to the conversation with Malik. The janitor had taught him more in a few minutes than Khaled's business mentors had in years. It wasn't just about language or success, it was about the things that really matter: relationships, self-awareness, humility. He had spent decades chasing external markers of success, believing that wealth and power were the ultimate rewards. But in that quiet exchange, Malik had shown him that true fulfillment comes from within. It comes from being at peace with who you are and living in a way that aligns with your values, not just your ambitions. As Khaled made his way down the street toward his car, he reflected on the change he had experienced in such a short time. He knew he couldn't erase the years of conditioning, the mindset that had driven him for so long. But he also knew that today marked the beginning of something different. He didn't have to keep running after the same goals, didn't have to keep proving himself to a world that was constantly demanding more. He could choose a different path, one where success wasn't defined by the balance of his bank account, but by his ability to live authentically, to connect with others, and to find peace within himself. Just as he reached his car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Khaled hesitated for a moment, then pulled it out, fully expecting another business call or an email about the failed deal. But when he saw the name on the screen, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It was a message from his assistant, reminding him about an upcoming meeting with some of his top executives. The old Khaled would have seen this meeting as yet another hurdle, another opportunity to flex his power and control. But now, with the clarity he had gained from his conversation with Malik, he saw it differently. It wasn't about asserting dominance or winning at all costs. It was about approaching the meeting with a fresh perspective, about being present, listening, and valuing the input of others. It was about leading with humility rather than authority. He made a mental note to approach the meeting with an open mind. The old Khaled would have walked into that room already knowing what he wanted and how he was going to get it. But now, he was ready to truly listen. He was ready to lead not with fear and intimidation, but with respect and understanding. As he drove toward the meeting, his thoughts turned back to Malik. He had given Khaled more than just advice. He had given him a new way of seeing the world, a new way of approaching life. The janitor, someone whom Khaled had once considered insignificant, had become a catalyst for his transformation. In the simple act of speaking to Khaled, Malik had shown him a truth that he had been too busy to see. Success isn't just about what you accomplish, it's about how you live, how you treat others, and how at peace you are with yourself. The meeting went as smoothly as Khaled had hoped. He entered the conference room with a calm demeanor, no longer feeling the pressure to be the loudest voice in the room. Instead of dominating the conversation, he actively listened to the ideas and concerns of his team. He recognized the value in their perspectives, acknowledging their input with genuine respect. His approach was different, more collaborative. There was no need for grandstanding or power plays. It was a refreshing change, one that felt more natural than anything he had done before. After the meeting, as Khaled left the building and walked back to his car, he felt something inside him shift once again. The weight of the world, his businesses, his reputation, no longer felt as heavy as it had before. He wasn't chasing the same markers of success. Instead, he was focused on living a life that was true to his values, a life where his actions aligned with his inner beliefs. In the days that followed, Khaled continued to embrace this new approach. He still had his businesses, still had his wealth, but they no longer defined him. What defined him now was his ability to connect with others, to be present in the moment, and to live with integrity. His relationships with his employees, his family, and his peers began to change for the better. He treated them with the respect and humility he had once reserved for only the most important people in his life. He learned to listen more, to understand more, and to value the people around him, not for what they could do for him, but for who they were as individuals. Khaled had found something far more valuable than wealth or power. He had found peace. And that peace was something no amount of money could buy. Malik had reminded him of a fundamental truth. Success is not something you chase, it is something you find when you are truly at peace with yourself. As Khaled drove home that evening, the sun setting on the horizon, he realized that he had taken the first real step toward a new kind of success. It wasn't the kind he had always sought, but it was the kind he had always needed. The kind that was built on inner strength, humility, and connection. And for the first time in years, Khaled felt content with the direction his life was heading.